Hello, my name is Tessa McBurney, and I'm the Atlantic Bat Conservation Project Technician with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative Atlantic Region. And today, I'm going to go over how to create metadata for stationary point survey acoustic files. So to start, I'm just going to show you how to take the SD card from the detector and transfer the data to your computer. So I've already taken the SD cards out of the detectors. So when I did this as a precautionary measure, I first shut the detector off by switching the black switch on the top right from INT, like internal, to EXT or external. So I flipped the switch on it before I took the SD card out. You can also remove the batteries at this time if the detector is not going to be used again in the near future. And all of the data are recorded on the SD card. So you can just remove the SD cards from the SD slots in the detector. So I removed those SD cards already, and I put the SD card into the SD slot in my computer. So that's the step I'm at now. So you can see here, SDHC, I have an SD card in my SD card slot. So I should be able to just click on that, and now I can see the data that's on that SD card. So I'm going to be able to copy that data and transfer it onto my computer. But before we do that, we're going to set up the folders that we want the data to be stored in. So I'm going to do that now. So just bear with me as I go through my computer files here so I can store it where I want to store it. We already have NABat data, over 5 years worth here. So the data I'm uploading now is from 2020. So I need to create a new folder, just an overarching folder. So for this, you can put your organization and NABat and the year. Because I have multiple years worth of data, the folder I have above this has our organization on it, CWHC, NABat data, and then I break it down by year, so you can do that if you want to. But this is the important part here. You're going to want to follow these steps exactly to ensure you have the correct folder. So I'm going to create 2 new folders, one for the raw data and one for the process data. Okay. And let's go into the raw data folder. So here I'm going to create a folder for my stationary surveys. And at this site, we also have conducted a mobile or multiple mobile transects. So I'm also now going to create a mobile transect folder, even though right now I'm just going to be focusing on the stationary survey. So in here, our stationary survey has 4 different sites. So I'm going to create a folder for each site. So we already have names for our sites just based on habitat and location. So you can choose whatever names you want for your 4 sites, or you could even have just site 1, site 2, site 3, site 4, but make sure that it's easy to know which site is which. That's why I prefer to use a descriptive term, because just looking at it, I know exactly what site it is without having to try to remember, oh, which is site 1. So those are our 4 sites. And then in the mobile transect folder, I'll just do this now, but you create a folder per mobile transect survey. And you can use the date if you want to break it down that way, or just mobile transect 1 or 2, whatever's easiest. We actually only did 1 transect this year on July, or last year, I guess. So I'll just I'll name it the folder, just the name with the date. So we just have 1. So that's your raw data. And now we want to make the same folders in our process data folder. So you can actually just copy these. It's the simplest way to do it. And in process data, you will paste those folders. So make sure they're not cut, they're copied, so you still have them in both raw and process data. So let's just check. So for our stationary survey, remember we had 4 sites. So those are all still in there. And then mobile transect, we had July 10th. Perfect. So we're still in our process data folder. So now we actually want to create 2 more folders within process data. And this will be for our metadata. So we want one for our stationary surveys. I usually just call it stationary survey metadata. And we also need a metadata folder for our mobile transect. So we should have 4 folders here within process data, and only the 2 within raw data, because we won't be creating metadata for the raw data files. Okay, so that's what it looks like. In our guide, there is a breakdown that you can follow if that was a little too fast, so just use that as a reference. Okay, so now we can copy our data over. So I'm going to go back to my SD card data. So the SD card I have in here is from our school site. So I'm just going to copy all of that data from the SD card, and I'm going to go back to our 2020 folder, and it's our raw data because we're just pulling it off the detector. It's a stationary survey site, and I said that it was the school site, so I'm just going to paste that data right there in our school folder. Okay, so now you would do this for all 4 of your sites. I can quickly do that now. I will tell you that once you have copied the data to your computer and you make sure that it's saved and backed up, and that you can't lose the data in any way, when you remove the SD card from your computer, so let's do that now. You'll want to make sure that you're removing it safely, so eject your SD card. Great. So when you remove it from the computer, you can put it back in the detector, and there will be an option on the detector to reformat the SD card, and that will remove all of the data and make sure that the card is reformatted to be used again. So you can find instructions on how to do that in our guide. So I'll quickly put in our other SD cards. And now all of your stationary data should be in the raw data file. So let's just check. Raw data, stationary survey. We have our farm data, forest trail data, golf course data, and our school data. And the detector is also just providing a summary text file as well, with some information, so you can look through that if you're interested. Okay, so now that we have all of the data safely on our computer, we can start to process it and create our metadata. So first you will need these forms from the USGS website downloaded on your computer. So the website is down right now, so I can't show you exactly what it looks like, but you can see in this image. So you can go to this website, the link is found in our guide, and we're only dealing with our stationary point survey data right now, so you need to download the 2 files that are in the red boxes here. So the NABat stationary meta output only, KPro essentially, and then the NABat metadata form Kaleidoscope stationary. So you will need to download those 2 files and have them on your computer. If for some reason the website isn't working for you either, you can always email me, and I have these files saved on my computer, so I can just send them to you. Okay. So you need those 2 files. And then another step, if you haven't done this before, you're going to need to create a species list for your monitoring area. And you're going to do that in your NABat project, which you should have already created. And there's another video with instructions on how to do that that you can check out. So you'll go back to your nabatmonitoring.org, log in through your partner portal. Log in. Go down to other Sciencebase accounts and log in with Sciencebase. Okay, so then you can go to projects at the top of the page, click on that. And then select the project that you will be creating the metadata for and processing the data for. So I'm going to select our project here. Okay. And you'll want to go now, once you're in the project that you will be working with the data with, you're going to want to go to Species List tab here at the top and click on that. So you can see I already have my species list created for this project, but I can show you how to create a new one as well. So you're going to click on this green Manage Classifiers button or the Edit button on the right. And then you can click the gray Add button to add a new species list. And even if you already have a species list, if you want a new list made for that particular project, you can do so. So you need to name your classifier. So you may name it with your province or your region, depending, or even if you're working within a provincial park or national park, you may decide to name it after that area. It's completely up to you, but give it a very original and descriptive title. So I'll just make this one for Prince Edward Island. Okay, and then you need a short description as well. So it does give you an example. Great. And after that, you can select your species to include in the definition column here. So you'll want to select all species that really could be in that area. So if you aren't sure which species to include, you can include all of the species in Atlantic Canada, which are listed here, these 7. So you can either just scroll through the list and pick the species you want included. And all of those 4-letter codes are in our guide if you're not sure what they stand for or what species to include. But you'll simply scroll down to the species that you want, like Epfu, big brown bat, and click on that. So you'll have to do that for each species. You can also search if you know the 4-letter code, like Lano, you'll want to include that as well. So you'll do that for all species that you want included in that list. And if you just unclick the check mark, if you accidentally include a species you didn't mean to, you can get rid of that species. Alternatively, if you click on the little X in the blue box with that species name, you can also remove that species. So I'll just select the species present on or potentially present on Prince Edward Island. Let's see here. So we also want Llano, Labo, Lassie, Milu, and Mycie. And it does also include some of the species groupings that we'll be using, as well as noise. So if you want to just include the species for that area, I think that's fine. But if you also wanted to include potentially some of these other categories you'll use, like no ID, 40K Myo, low F, high F, no. Fulano, Labo Pesu is one you may use, not for Prince Edward Island. Potentially Labo Milu. So you can include those as well. So once you have all of the species selected or grouping selected for your classifier, you're going to click the green Save button at the top right here. And that will save your new classifier. So if you want to delete that classifier or edit it, you will go into this green Manage Classifiers button again, so you can edit those however you want. And if you want to delete the whole classifier, you can just click on this red X under the trash can. So just going to click Cancel. So that has created your classifier. So when you are processing the data, you will need to know the title or the name of your classifier. So just make a note of that. Okay, great. So now that we've done that, we can leave the NABat website. And you're going to want to launch your Kaleidoscope converter window. So to do that, remember, you can just click on the icon on your desktop. Okay, and that has opened our Kaleidoscope converter window. So just a note, to follow these steps, you will need to be using Kaleidoscope version 5 or later. So if you don't have version 5 or a more recent version, you will have to download that from the website before you can follow these steps. And there are instructions on how to do that in another video. You can check what version you have by going to Help and then About Kaleidoscope, and you can see I have version 5.3.9. And you will need to make a note of that as well, potentially, as we're going through these steps. So that's how you find your version of Kaleidoscope. So I have a version that's later than just version 5, so that's great. So the first thing to do once you open your converter window is just to make sure that you are on BAT analysis mode, because we are working with bats. So that's the first step, okay? Now we're going to select our data that we're about to process. And remember, we're working with our stationary point data right now, our stationary point acoustic survey data. So in input directory, I'm going to browse. And I'm going to select raw data from just one of my stationary sites, okay? So wherever you have that saved on your computer, you've just copied it from your SD cards. So it won't look exactly like that, but you're going to go into raw data, stationary survey, and just whichever site you want to start at. I'm just going to start from the top, and you're going to select the data folder. Okay, so select that for your input. And then in your output directory folder, you will pick the matching folder in your process data subfolder. So again, I'm going to browse. It's going to send me to the input folder automatically. So I'm just going to go back to my 2020 folder. And now I'm going to go into process data. Again, you want your stationary survey. And I had chosen farm, the top folder. So just make sure that you choose the matching site. That's very important. I'm going to select that folder as my output folder. Okay, so your next step is to change this drop down here. So when you first open it, it might have the default project form listed. So you're going to select that drop down, and you may need to click add or replace project form. I already have the options we want because I've used these forms before, but you can do add or replace project form. And then you're going to want to choose those files that you downloaded from the USGS website. So I'll just show you, I think. Okay, so here are my forms in their location. So just remember where you save them on your computer. And the form we want right now is the NABat metadata form Kaleidoscope stationary. Okay, so we're going to want to click on that form here. Mine also has BC on it because mine is a little different. I can always send you this form if you want this one to work with. So then you're going to click open. After a little bit of a struggle, it's going to open this NABat project form for you like this, okay? And you can scroll down through that form. So we need to start filling that out to create our metadata. Okay, so if you hover over a field, it will give you a description of that field, and it may also show you the format you need to type into that field for it to complete properly. Like you can see you need to use decimal degrees here. The survey start and end time has very particular formatting, so pay close attention to that. But I'm going to go through it with you now. So yes, we started with our farm site. So I have to remember that. Okay, so the first field you need to fill out is grit cell ID. So you should have made a note of this, but if you forget what it is, on your NABat project, your grit cell ID will be listed here, and I'm on the species list tabs right now, but it can be, even if you're on the details tab, it will say right here. So my grit cell ID is 8908. So just type that in the box. Location name, I said that this was our farm site, so you'll use your site name for that particular site, and then you'll want to type in the latitude and longitude. Survey start and end time. So again, you'll want to follow the formatting here closely. So you start with the year, dash, and then the month. And then the date or the day. And then you're going to put an uppercase T for time. And then the hour. So this is in 24-hour time. So 20. And then a colon. And then you're going to put the minutes. And then the seconds. If you don't know the seconds, you can just put 00. Okay, so that should work. And then for end time, it's the same thing, but when your survey ends. So also July ended on the 13th, time, and it ended in the morning, so 6:04. And there you go. That should work. So you don't have to fill in all of these fields, but the more information you add, the better just for yourself as keeping a record. And you also don't have to fill in all the data right now. You can just fill in the required fields now, and then on the website, once you upload your data, you can add in more information as well. So these fields so far, these are all required. I'm also going to put in my detector type. This is not a required field. I'm just going to enter it now, and you can see the format it has to be in when I hover over. So I want wildlife acoustics SM4BAT FS. So just want to make sure that I have the right formatting there. I think, yeah. And I'm also going to include my serial number, but again, this is not a requirement. I just have this information, so I'm going to add it here. Oh, and at this site, we actually use an SM3 detector. You'll likely be using an SM4, but we use some of our older detectors, so I'm going to change that to SM3BAT. Okay, and our microphone. So you have some options there as well. So make sure if you are filling this in that you're using the right microphone type. It won't be the same one that I have listed here. And if you have the microphone serial number as well, which I do have. The orientation. So again, none of these fields are necessary. Okay. So I had this written down in degrees, but it's actually asking for the direction. So I'm going to have to change the formatting I have for that. So it's north, northwest. Okay, so northwest. The microphone height, again, not a requirement. They want it in meters. And I have it written down in feet, of course, so I'm going to have to convert it. Okay, so there are more fields you can fill out here. Distance nearest clutter is another good one. Clutter type. Habitat type is also good. The weather conditions. So if you record the data on our data forms, then you'll likely have recorded all of these conditions, and that's great. So you can enter them here. If you're going into that much detail, I would suggest likely doing it on the website because you can have some errors here. So I wouldn't spend a long time typing a lot of data in here. You can always add it to the website later. So the weather conditions are always really important, so that's good to have, but I'm not going to enter them in here now. You do need to put your software type if you're using auto ID software. So if your software has auto ID, you do need to put the software type. And I did show you how to find that. Remember, you go to help, about, and it will list your version there. If you aren't using auto ID, if you're only using the free version of the software, you should be able to put in no auto ID. If this does create an issue for you later on, you can just put in the version of Kaleidoscope, but the NABat website should have included this as an option now. So again, you need this in a particular format. So my version is 5.3.9. You don't include the last number, you put an X instead. So we'll see if this works. The last time I tried to upload data, it only would accept up to version 5.1. So I may need to change this later just to be able to upload the data, but ideally the website should have updated this to include the newest version of software. And then you'll want to add that species list that you created on the NABat website, remember? So I have on my project here, I have two options. I'm going to use the Atlantic Canada classifier for right now. So I'm going to type in that name. Great. So I believe those are all of the required fields. Okay, so there, we're done with our metadata form. So that's great. So after that, we're going to go over to this section. So under create subdirectories, I have it on nightly. So this just means when the data gets processed, it's going to split up the data by recording night. I just find this helpful to have the data divided by night. If you don't want that, you can select none and have just all of your data in one folder, but I think it's good to have it organized by night, so I'm going to leave it on that. And then you're going to make sure this box is checked next to WAV files. So if you have WAV files, you will be able to analyze the files in Kaleidoscope under both full spectrum and zero cross analysis, which I'm not going to explain now. That you can read about that more in our guide, but that is what is recommended. But those files do take up more space. So if you want zero cross only files, which take up less space, you can select that box as well. That way you would create both WAV and zero cross files. If you wanted only zero cross files, you can select that only zero cross, but I really think the standard should include WAV files, so at least create both. But I'm just going to create WAV files, not the zero cross files, so the files aren't duplicated. So you can read more about that in the guide if you're interested on what those different kinds of files will actually look like. But basically, if you're creating WAV files, it covers both bases without duplicating the files. Okay. And then going through the list, I have selected here move noise files to a noise subfolder. So this way, based on some of the other settings, we're going to include in this software, files will automatically be moved to a noise subfolder. So if the software decides that they're noise, they'll move them to a separate subfolder for us. So that's helpful just for screening calls. You should still go through the noise files because it can make mistakes and include BAT passes within those files. So I would still check them, but it is a helpful screening tool. If you don't want to do that, you can disable noise filtering and it won't move the noise files to a separate folder, but I would keep them in a noise subfolder. Don't delete the noise files because like I said, the software can make mistakes, so I wouldn't delete them, but you can disable noise filtering if you want to. You can also select extract GPS to CSV from the dropdown. And here in this box here, this is the frequency of waypoint extraction, which you can specify in seconds. You can change this as desired, or you can leave it on the standard 60 seconds, which I typically do. So this setting will result in a GPS.csv with an associated waypoint for each recorded file. If you would prefer to create a GPS.kml, so you can directly open the file in Google Earth, you can change this to extract GPS to KML. You can also select extract GPS disabled if you do not want to create a GPS file, but I just typically leave it on this setting here. Okay, so right now you can see we're under the batch tab. So now we're going to move over to the signal params or signal parameters tab, and this is going to specify some of the settings for the files. So here at the top, make sure that the minimum and maximum frequency range is 15 to 120 kilohertz. So we're saying that we want to look at files where there are frequencies within this range, and that should cover the range for all bat species in Atlantic Canada. So basically, if you have files with a frequency below this range, so like below 15 kilohertz, those files, audio recordings won't be recognized by the Kaleidoscope program. So this means that when you're looking at the files in compressed time, no bat pulses will be observable. So the screen will be gray outside of these designated outside of this designated frequency range. So just keep that in mind. So you can still see the entire recording in normal time view regardless. So even if you do have frequencies below 15 kilohertz, you should still see them in normal time view, not the compressed time view. So that just further explains why it's important to look at each file in normal and compressed time view. So for more information on that, you can see our other videos where we're explaining how to use the Kaleidoscope viewer, but just for a bit of background information on that section there. So next to minimum maximum length of detected pulses, we'll want the range to be 1 to 500 milliseconds. And then the minimum number of pulses should be set to 3. And maximum intersyllable gap should be on 500, but you shouldn't have to change that setting. So the minimum number of pulses is important for determining whether a file is a BAT pass or not. So I'm not going to explain what a BAT pass is here, but for our requirements would be that you need to have 3 pulses to consider a file a BAT pass, and that's why we're specifying here that your minimum number of pulses should be 3. So if you're not using auto ID, so if you don't have that option, if you have auto ID for bats and there's a red X next to it, you only have the free version of software, then here, when zero crossing for conversion or analysis enhanced with advanced signal processing, you'll want to uncheck this box. So that box really should only be checked if you're using auto ID. So if you're not using auto ID, please uncheck that box. Okay, if you are using auto ID, make sure that that box is checked. It will help with the auto ID analysis. And then still, if you're using auto ID, you will go to the auto ID tab up here. Okay. So then you'll want to select from the drop down the most recent version of Bats of North America. So that would be 5.2.1 right now. Great. And then in the drop down next to it, I would select +1 more accurate or conservative. So that means when the software is calculating auto ID, it's relying on more conservative methods for doing that. So it's less likely to mislabel a file. It may be more likely also to not feel confident in giving a concrete ID label for that file, but it's better, in my opinion, to be more conservative with your ID. So I like to keep it on +1 more accurate or conservative. And then after that, you're going to want to select your species, the species in your area. So this should be the same species that you've already added to your species list in the classifier. So you have to do it a second time, unfortunately. And just make a note here that Kaleidoscope is using the 3-letter species code, not the 4-letter species code that NABat uses. So just keep that in mind when you're selecting the species. So for Atlantic Canada, you'll want your big brown bat, labo, your hoary bat, your silver-haired bat, your little brown myotis and northern myotis, and your tricolored bat. So there should be 7 species for Atlantic Canada, but of course, if you're in a region that maybe doesn't have all these species, you can specify that in the list on that switch. So we'll just make sure that is back. And they do have a select by region button, which is interesting. Let's see what they, so I'm not sure how they decide this, but it's not including all of the species for our region. So I guess it hasn't been updated. So you can use that maybe to start selecting your species, but make sure that it includes all of the species that you are going to be potentially seeing in your area. Okay. So once you've done that, you can go back to batch. And if you didn't have auto ID, you would already be back at this step. So you would just, if you were not using auto ID, this box wouldn't be checked, and then you would immediately go to batch. At this point, we can select process files at the bottom right. Because we have changed some of these settings, the settings under signal params, it's going to ask us if we're sure. But I'm sure, so I'm going to click OK to start processing the files. So that can take a few minutes. If you are working with a large amount of data, it may take a little while to process the data, so just keep that in mind. So you can see once the file is finished processing, it's going to open the first file within that folder, the process file. It's going to automatically open it in Kaleidoscope, and it also automatically opens this little table here. So that can be useful as well. I'm not going to explain how to go through these files right now. I just wanted to show you how to process them. So let's check our file folder for that file. So again, it's in process data. So we should have the data in our farm site. And you can see here we do. So because we selected nightly, the data is split up by recording night. So if we open that, we can see, and we also have a noise subfolder created. So the software has screened some files as noise for us. So that will be in each, the folders for each night if there is noise on that night. So make sure you check the data in all of those files. You can see it's also created some other files for us here. So if you're using the free version of software, it will create this log.txt file, and this keeps a record of each step of the file processing that we just did. So that's helpful for diagnostics. If an error occurs at some point, you have a record of the steps that you took when you processed the data. You'll also have this settings.ini file. This keeps a record of the settings used in the Kaleidoscope converter window during data processing. So now that you have specified all of your selected settings, if you open the Kaleidoscope converter window again, it should have those settings saved for you anyway. But if you change them at some point and you want to use the exact same files that you used here, you can actually open this document in the Kaleidoscope converter. I can show you. So you're going to go to your Kaleidoscope converter. window again, and you're going to select File, Load Settings. We're going to go back. Sorry, so many files to go through. And you can select that file there and hit select Open. And then that can pull up those exact same settings for you again, so that's helpful. You also have your GPS.csv file that we specified, or if you switch that to KML, you'll have a KML file there. If you selected to disable the GPS file, so if you selected extract GPS disabled, you won't have a GPS file. And then you'll also have your meta.csv. So this file contains all the metadata that were entered into the NABat metadata form when in that Kaleidoscope converter window. So everything we typed into here will be in this meta.csv file. And it will also provide a list of all the files recorded within this stationary point survey site. And eventually this is where the manual ID will be added. So you can see all of that information we typed in, our grid cell number, our location name, latitude, longitude. I also included some extra information. You can see it's all here. And then it's going to list all of our files. So it gives the audio recording name for each file. The in file as well. The audio recording time. So you can see that's in the same format that we typed in earlier. It has again our software type. If you have auto ID, the auto ID may show up in here. And manual ID, this is where your manual IDs will eventually populate, will be in this column here, and then your species list. So that's if you have the free version of software. If you are using the purchase version of software with auto ID, you're going to have a few more files. So you can see I have those here. So you're also going to have an ID summary.csv. And this file gives a summary of the number of recorded files for each species on each monitoring night using the auto ID classifications. So you can see here, it's broken down by recording night and then species. So it's giving me an idea of how many species, how many of each species, how many files, sorry, for each species were recorded on each recording night. So that can be useful to look at. You're also going to have your id.csv, and this provides a list of all the files recorded within that stationary point survey site. It's going to include averages of different call parameter values, which can be helpful to look at for each file. And it's going to give the auto ID for each file in here. So if it didn't populate in your meta.csv, sorry. So remember our meta.csv that we were looking at here, the auto ID column was blank. So you can always copy that data over into the auto ID column from here. These are our auto IDs in this column and your id.csv. And if you are using the pro version of software, your manual IDs will be added to this file, not the meta.csv, over here in manual ID. So there are a little differences if you're using the free versus the purchased or pro version of software. So if that's confusing, it's always described in more detail in our guide. So that can be helpful. And you can see beyond the auto ID, it does sometimes also give you some alternate, either an alternate 1 or an alternate 2 IDs. And then here are your call parameters here for that file. So this would be the average for the whole file, like your characteristic frequency and your slope of call body. And so those numbers can be useful to look at. Okay, so now that we've done that, we have to go back and process the data for our other 3 stationary survey sites using the same method. So I won't go through all of that now. It's the same steps, but you will just change your input and output directory. So for input, we'll want our next stationary site. And for output, we'll also want our next stationary site. So again, make sure they match. I picked Forest's Trail for both. Just go through and make sure that all of your settings are the same. Okay, and then once you do that, you will have to fill out your NABat project form again for that site with all of the same information. So remember, the required fields are grid cell ID, location name, latitude, longitude, survey start, survey end time, your software type, and species list. And once you do that, you can select process files and then do that for the next 2 survey sites. Great, I hope that was helpful.